We keep hearing about hydrogen. What is the hydrogen economy? Well, in today's video, we're going to look at a webinar we did 1 or 2 years ago in the TROVE Renewables series. I hope you enjoy. Today's topic, hydrogen, is a very, very broad topic indeed. And without any further ado, I'd like to start off by answering the question, what is the hydrogen economy? Well, I guess at the end of the day, it is a vision. And if I look at this diagram here that was produced by Carbon Brief, we'll start in the bottom left-hand corner. And I will note that this actually needs a little bit of replumbing. So if we start down here with oil and gas and coal, you can see that they're the inputs. Now, they don't go straight to CCS. They actually go straight into the plant here, where we have methane steam reforming to generate hydrogen. That's how most hydrogen is produced today. One of the outputs from that is carbon dioxide, which you can see here to the left. But we also look to capture that carbon dioxide with CCS, which would make for blue hydrogen. We'll come back to the colors in a little while, but this is how most hydrogen is produced today. In the top left, you can see all the processes that use electrolysis, essentially breaking out hydrogen from water. And we use the power from, or excess power that comes from solar farms, from wind farms, and from nuclear plants, to name 3 areas. There will be others in time, but these are kind of seen as being the main ones. And these two produce hydrogen. So with the hydrogen, we have to store the hydrogen. Here you can see surface storage. We'll talk about surface storage and underground storage. And from that, we basically then supply or turn the hydrogen, we burn it, turn it back into power, into electricity, which then goes to feed the grid. Hydrogen can be distributed, and here's a hydrogen carrier ship. We'll see one of those in a little while. And then the hydrogen can go to industry, it can go to domestic heating, it can go essentially into transport. We'll take a long look at the different aspects of transport, whether they be planes, trains, ships, trucks, cars, etc. The fertilizer production is essentially the ammonia production, which is by the Haber-Bosch process, and we won't really talk about that in any great detail today. But then you can see it's the conversion back into power. So we basically start with power, we turn it into gas, and then we turn it back into power. So it is known as P to G to P, not the most zingy of acronyms. So really, I look at this and I think, well, actually, we've pretty much described quite a lot of the economy. So hydrogen economy itself is really, well, what is the definition? Well, the best one I found, actually, we've modified this Wikipedia one. It's that the hydrogen economy is an envisioned future in which hydrogen is used as a fuel for heating, for hydrogen vehicles, for energy storage, and for long-distance transport, in order to phase out fossil fuels and limit global warming. Hydrogen can be created from water using intermittent renewable sources, e.g. wind and solar. Its combustion only releases water vapor. It's an ideal or a vision. Really, what we've got in the current status with hydrogen is we've got an awful lot of research and development projects in universities, in private industry, government funded. We've got ongoing pilots, and we've had pilots that have been working in the past. We've got a number of demonstrators, some small scale systems, but really we're really at the start of kind of the scale up for hydrogen. Now, our product Trove, what we do is we capture all of these products, but we actually allow people to separate the wheat, the really meaningful ones, from the chaff. But we actually present the smaller projects, because there's some important research and findings. We kind of separate reality and pragmatism from the sort of the Fox News type headlines that we might see. But we also recognize the bottom line is that hydrogen is not a primary energy source. Hydrogen is about moving energy from where you produce it and using it elsewhere, or storing it to be used elsewhere. And we'll go into the reasons why that is not a major primary subject. So hydrogen uses today, find different numbers out there, but we're using in the order of 80 to 90 million tons per annum. And this is a drop in the ocean, really, compared with all the energy we're using from various other sources. The major uses, this is data back from 2019 from the Energy Institute, and you can see that mainly it's petroleum refining. We use hydrogen to basically hydrogenate, I think that's the word, in the sort of cracking and refining process. It's used in ammonia production, as mentioned earlier, for fertilizer production, for methanol in steel, and in other uses. So that's where it is used today. About 85% is sourced from using fossil fuels to generate the hydrogen. And if we don't actually then clean up the carbon dioxide, that is referred to as grey hydrogen. And we'll see more of the colours shortly. This is a map a map of the world, which kind of gives an indication of where power to gas plants are, but it's kind of indicative. It shows that there's a huge concentration of projects in Europe. There are a number in North America. There are quite a number in the Far East, although in this particular area, China's not showing up. China has a good number of projects. And then notable mentions really for Australia and Brazil, another two countries that are getting very much involved in hydrogen. What are the future uses going to be? Well, we'll have a look in some detail at various parts of the transport sector and see where hydrogen could be used there. In buildings, we'll look at spiking H2S into natural gas. What happens when we do that? Can we substitute hydrogen and use it in that way in heating, etc.? And we'll look at storage and sort of note that hydrogen and ammonia, can be used to a degree in gas turbines, and we'll talk to that. So why hydrogen? Well, we know that hydrogen is colorless, it's odorless, it's the smallest molecule. It burns very, very easily. It produces only water vapor, so there are no greenhouse gases associated with it. And a number of other properties listed there. In essence, when we look and kind of judge popularity, this is using Google's Books Ngram Viewer. You see, well, just how often that word has been used in all the publications that Google monitor worldwide. And you can see that hydrogen has kind of grown through the years. So, even back in the 1940s, people were talking about hydrogen. It seems to peak here around about the 1980s, and really in the last 20 years, hasn't been quite as many mentions of it. But at the same time, you can see that hydrogen fuel cell has really picked up here in the 1990s. So here's the proposition. Why don't we just use methane infrastructure, convert it all over to hydrogen, use hydrogen, run transport, run power generation, all the heating, let's run everything on hydrogen, and in one fell swoop, we've sorted climate change. Well, the rest of this talk is going to sort of show that, yes, there are opportunities, but there are some limitations and some challenges that have to be addressed for hydrogen. Now we're going to kind of have a look at the types of hydrogen, the colors. So here's a list of all the colors we were able to find, and we've kind of ordered them where sort of increasing emissions, really from green down to black. So if I start with at the top, white is naturally occurring hydrogen. There isn't a lot, but there is some, so we've acknowledged that. Green is from the electrolysis of water, and so it's very, very clean and uses surplus renewable energy. Pink is powered by nuclear power. Again, it's very clean, it's electrolysis. Yellow, a term that's sometimes given to electrolysis using solar power. Blue, well, that's when we take grey, which is from this steam reforming, and we capture the CO2 through carbon capture and storage. That's blue hydrogen, and it is a lot cleaner than, of course, than grey. Turquoise is a particular type, well, it's methane pyrolysis, which only produces hydrogen and solid carbon, so it doesn't go into the atmosphere. And then we have brown and black for the lignites and bituminous coals, which are used in the gasification. Another one that really doesn't fit into this is sort of biomass. And, we can either leave biomass to ferment and degrade, produces lots of methane and carbon dioxide, which goes into the atmosphere, or by collecting it and actually capturing that and converting it into hydrogen and then capturing the associated carbon dioxide, we can actually get another source of hydrogen. Biomass, we kind of think maybe sort of fits in at this point here, although there's an argument that it actually stops natural CO2 and methane emissions. What do these sources all have in common? Well, they all but one, and the one exception being actually the naturally occurring hydrogen, all but one are multi-step processes, and they all have considerable efficiency losses on the way, and we'll have a look at those. We want to simplify everything down here, so taking all the colors that we talked to just a minute ago, essentially we'll just ignore those, and really we're talking about green, which is using electrolysis of water and surplus renewable energy. Blue is essentially fossil fuels but with carbon capture, and grey is from fossil fuels without carbon capture. So looking at blue hydrogen, and you can see here that we start off with fuel, which is methane in this case, and we end up with fuel, which is hydrogen. And along the way, we have a lot of losses. What are those losses? Well, first of all, we have to mix the natural gas with steam. This is the steam reformation. So that requires heat. From that process and simplifying it, we generate hydrogen, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide. We then either can use that, which is our grey hydrogen, or we can remove the CO2, which involves doing more work, and capture that carbon in carbon capture. And whichever way we look at it, we lose at least 30% of the energy through this conversion process. So, it is not thermodynamically, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense, but there are no greenhouse gases, so it is very, very good in that respect. So looking now at green hydrogen and electrolysis, in essence, how hydrogen fuel cells work. Well, this has been used a long time. It was actually used back in the Gemini and Apollo space programs, taken into space to generate power. And so what you have here is an anode and a cathode and an electrolyte between it. So you put in hydrogen side, oxygen on the other, the ions flow. The load here is actually the electricity that's generated, and here you can see that the water is the only emission from this particular process. The electrolyte, essentially, it's a proton exchange membrane, so it only lets the hydrogen ions through. If we now go on and look at yellow hydrogen, and I said we'd only use these expressions, but I kind of like yellow, where we're looking at solar. And it may be that in the future, the combination of solar and hydrogen production may take many of the developing countries out of energy poverty, and sort of highlighted some of these regions of the world where some of them, or most of them, except for the Middle East, of course, are not blessed with huge natural resources. So having this would be very good. The relative cost of the various greys and blues and green hydrogen is shown here. And so, one is double the other, green is kind of treble. Now, this is from a recent report by Fit Solutions, but where it's going to go is going to be interesting to see what comes out of COP26 and the potential carbon tax and global initiatives to basically change that. So the reality of climate change, these are very bold statements I actually saw on a video online, and our values state that, the atmosphere is critical for life, but economically, the atmosphere is a free and open sewer. Now, we discharge into the seas and into the oceans, but there are charges associated with it, standards to be met. But by and large, we've been basically releasing any emissions into the atmosphere since time began. Methane emissions, they're essentially free. Carbon dioxide emissions are variably taxed. Different countries have different rules in different parts of the world, but generally speaking, the carbon tax is relatively cheap. So having a look at methane versus hydrogen and looking at methane, well, methane is cheap. The infrastructure has been in place now for many decades. It's well established. It's a lot cleaner than coal and than oil, and it is very much going to be a transition fuel for decades to come. It's very easy to transport. Main reason is that all that infrastructure, the pipelines, the terminals, they've all been put in place. We now have liquefied natural gas, and it can be transported around the world as a commodity. The downside with methane is, of course, that it does have some carbon dioxide emissions, and there is an issue with some leakage, not just at the production and processing end, but also at the transmission and distribution end. For hydrogen, well, hydrogen is currently expensive. It is very, very clean. It's actually harder to transport. Kind of look at that in a little more detail. There are no CO2 emissions, in inverted commas, because, well, there are associated emissions with the construction phase, the decommissioning phase, and just the general operation where fossil fuels are going to be powering vehicles, etc. So we can say it's kind of none, but recognize there are some. And it's prone to more leakage. It's a smaller molecule. It's very easy to move around. Let's kind of think about, well, why don't we just add hydrogen to methane and just burn the mixture? Well, here's a graph showing what happens. And on the y-axis, you can see the energy content, which is obviously highest when you've got 100% methane, and is shown here as you add incrementally more hydrogen to the mix and dilute the amount of methane in that mixture. So we've highlighted here in green bars that yes, 100% methane, 90% methane, 10% hydrogen, and then finally 80% methane and 20% hydrogen. We can get a product where we lose only some 14% of the energy from the mixture, and there is a modest but small reduction in the amount of carbon dioxide. So there are energy losses, and you certainly wouldn't be looking to run gas turbines at anything less than 80 because they won't like it, nor will burners and sort of your gas ring on your cooker will certainly not run at anything less than 80%. So it is a dilutance because you're getting less energy density. You do have to compress it more to get the same energy density, and there is a modest emission saving from it. So when we think of hydrogen, and sometimes, and this is what there is some confusion, is that on a unit mass basis, hydrogen has a greater density, energy density. So that's great news. But the problem is most hydrogen we're actually using when it's back in the gaseous phase, or it's converted back to the gaseous phase. And in that phase, it actually has a lower energy density per unit volume. So that's bad news. Typically, we need about over 3 volumes of hydrogen to generate the same amount of energy that we would get from gas. So more compression is required, which means higher pressures, which means putting in work and putting in energy to make that happen. There is more pipe friction. It's a small thing, but I've had it in here. There would be a tendency to be more leaks because it is the smallest of molecules. And consequently, there are problems for the burners and turbines with just using hydrogen. Now, that can all be fixed, but there is a huge capital cost associated with upgrading all of the infrastructure. Hydrogen has a very, very wide explosive range, between 4 and 75% per volume of air will be an explosive mixture. And it can't use the stenching agents. They're the sulfur compounds that are added into methane so that people can actually detect the leaking gas. It's what gives gas that rotten smell. Those stenching agents, they make poison catalysts and are not compatible with hydrogen. We've also got a public perception about hydrogen, and I mean, the Hindenburg here, that's probably fueled some of that. It's unfounded. People don't think about sitting on a plane where the wings are absolutely full to the brim with jet fuel, and also there's tanks under the seats in the fuselage. But hydrogen does have this perception, which the public have to be reassured on that. So Just a quick aside and talk about pollution, and this is a great shot because many people would look at this and see it as pollution. Of course, these are cooling towers, and the only gas that's coming out of those is actually water vapor. So water vapor is a greenhouse gas, but it's not really a major pollutant. Very fast cycle for it. So it's not all about fossil fuels, though 80% of total greenhouse gas emissions are from energy production and consumption. You can see there's things like sulfur hexafluoride. That's used in as an insulator in switchgear. That there is something. Some people say that that's increasing with the use of wind turbines, but it really is overstated. And you can look at that when you look at the graph top right. You can see that carbon dioxide is by far and away the major greenhouse gas that we need to deal with. Methane is a significant contributor, and nitrous oxides in there as well. But you can see that the role of sulfur hexafluoride is relatively tiny, though it does have an atmospheric residency, which is measured in millennia. This is the source of this data. So now we're just going to go on and take a quick look at transport. So when it comes to transport, we'll start with cars, and number of fuel cell vehicles or hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, or sometimes you put the word E in the FCEV, HFC, or FCV. So a number of ranges. There's a few brands that are already out there. This is a list of the companies who have or are researching and developing hydrogen vehicles. Most of the major car manufacturers in the world are looking into it. Elon Musk refers to these as fuel cells, and guess why he might say that? Well, he's got a vested interest in battery electric vehicles with his company Tesla. So when we kind of compare them, one of the criticisms of battery electric vehicles is they take too long to charge, and so in that respect the hydrogen fuel cell vehicle is preferred. But that's changing, and there's lots of developments in terms of extra fast chargers in liquid batteries and in solid state batteries, so that situation is going to be changing. Limited range, well, again, we'll have a look at that and a comparison with some vehicles. And again, right now, or at a snapshot in time, that does favor the hydrogen fuel cells. And in terms of cost, well, the battery cars are cheaper. This is a snapshot of US car prices back in December 2019, and you can see the battery electric vehicles are significantly cheaper than their hydrogen fuel cell equivalents. If we look in terms of efficiency, I won't go into the detail of this, but it's broken out by sort of the source to getting it into the tank or into the battery in the vehicle, and then from once it's in the vehicle to the efficiency to getting that power to the wheel. You can see that battery electric vehicles are very, very efficient, up at around about 73%. A typical hydrogen fuel cell car would be around about 22%, so significantly less efficient than a battery car, but still significantly more efficient than the equivalent petrol and diesel cars. So there are definitely benefits with HFCs, but right now on this metric alone, BEVs looking to be very, very efficient. When we look at range, here are some quoted ranges for FCVs, and battery electric don't have the same range currently, but things are changing quickly. The big differentiator, I guess, is the lack of hydrogen infrastructure. We can illustrate that over in California. So the map on the left shows all the green dots show the hydrogen stations, and there are only 44 of them on this map. At the same time, and this was a couple of years ago, there were over 1,600 electric chargers, battery chargers, and across the US, around about that sort of same point in time, there was over 150,000 what we'd call petrol stations or gas stations. You can imagine the scenario where you set out for a weekend from San Francisco and drive over to to Mono Lake on the other side of Yosemite. You could do it in any of the vehicles pretty much, but once you got there, you'd be at least 100 miles away from the nearest hydrogen charging point. So, something's going to have to change, and that will change in time. Looking at battery electric vehicles, there is a diminishing return for increased battery capacity. And the reason is because batteries are very, very heavy. And as the weight goes up, it kind of comes to a point where, here measured in terms of range, you start approaching a limit. Now, battery electric vehicles have had a head start, and Tesla in particular control about 60% of the United States electric vehicle market. But bear in mind that that's only actually 2% of the entire US car market. So though they're way ahead, there is an opportunity for hydrogen to catch up. And with more hydrogen stations and more hydrogen cars, there will be economies of scales, and they'll result in lower costs. I think in time, it's possible that certainly in some of the sunnier parts, we might actually see solar panels and small electrolysis units actually alongside existing petrol station and actually making hydrogen on site. So that can be a sort of distributed network. One thing that we really don't want to see is, and kind of it's inevitable really, that we may see a period of time that we've got petrol stations, hydrogen stations and battery chargers. And I don't think that's particularly efficient when we look at what we're trying to achieve here in terms of climate change. Looking now at trucks, we can see that certainly for forklift trucks, there is a lot. They've doubled between 2016 and today. There's over 25,000 of them worldwide. Hydrogen-fueled trucks, their range and their refueling time is kind of similar to diesel trucks. So essentially, they can compete, and over time, the running costs are a lot less. So anywhere where you have a sort of a depot and you can bring a lot of hydrogen to one place and distribute it, locally, very, very locally, then it makes an awful lot of sense to be looking at hydrogen. And there'll be a lot of developments with hydrogen trucking over the next few years. In 2019 alone, China added over 10,000 hydrogen trucks to its fleet. And buses, well, there are numerous places in the world where buses are being either trialed or actually have gone into commercial use, including here in Aberdeen, where I'm speaking from. And you can see here that later this year, we're going to actually see the hydrogen buses actually are going to be used extensively at the Olympic Games. For planes, Airbus are targeting having commercial net zero hydrogen plane by 2030. There's already Zero Avia. I've got a 6-seater which can do up to 500-mile range. But, conscious of the fact that the limitation is that, jet fuel has got a higher energy density than hydrogen. It's well established. It may be one of the higher hanging fruits. Certainly commendable that we're looking into it, but we do have something established there. Trains, well, again, the concentrated distribution, when trains go to a terminal at night, they can all be refueled from a central hydrogen source. They can be recharged a lot quicker than a battery equivalent. And, we already see this train here is built by Alstom and has been running in Germany since 2018, with other countries to follow shortly. In terms of boats and ships, this is actually a hydrogen carrier, and we'll actually see another picture of it later on. But you can see there's actually only these 2 containers actually that contain hydrogen. This is the Hystra project here. It's the world's first hydrogen carrier, so this is for distribution. Ironically, the ship itself isn't powered on hydrogen, which I kind of think in time will change, but that's where we are right now. Looking at developments, ongoing developments and future developments, well, these are some of the projects that we monitor here and actually have in our TROVE knowledge base. One that we were watching very, very closely is this NEOM. It's a city of the future that's being built in Saudi Arabia on the Red Sea coast. The total investment that we're talking about here is in the order of $500 billion. And they're bringing in solar and wind power right across from the eastern parts of Saudi, piping them in here, 170-kilometer pipeline. And there's going to be all sorts of developments. And that's going to be one to watch. Another one to mention is Wuhan. And yes, that Wuhan, that's actually has been targeted as being one of the future cities which is going to be largely powered by hydrogen. And these are sort of fairly modest numbers right now, but there's a lot more plans that the Chinese have. So of the 728 projects that are actually in our Trove knowledge base of today, the countries are broken out here by the number of projects. And you can see really the first 5 in the list are Europe, and then you get USA, Australia, then China, Japan. But an awful lot of interest in Europe, possibly because a lot of information is actually published. It's very, very transparent. It's very easy to find information. These projects are at varying stages of development. Some are small-scale R&D pilots. Others have actually completed, been decommissioned. And we also have commercial. So again, it's this idea of trying to separate the wheat from the chaff, which can be easily done. Special mention for Australia, which is currently got in the order of 37 gigawatts of electrolyzer projects planned, with 4 of those actually currently under development. I mean, these numbers are huge. One of the problems and the issues for hydrogen is how do we store it? And, we can store it on the surface here. You can store it in pressurized containers. And 1 kilogram of liquid hydrogen is significantly more energy than 1 kilogram of lithium-ion batteries. But, you do have to do a lot of work in terms of pressure or lowering the temperature to actually liquefy hydrogen. And what we're talking about is actually kind of scaling up. It's not small scale things we're looking to fix. Here's another look at this high stress ship. So here's one of these hydrogen stores. There's room for just one other, but in terms of the volume of cargo hold that's being used, is not the most efficient looking storage. We'll see how that develops in the coming years. Now, when we start talking about scale, we want to look at this one and electricity. The peaks here are winter, the troughs are summer. We know that, in Scotland here, we've managed to generate most of our power for electricity from renewable sources. Transport, we've talked about at some length. You can see that that's one of the areas that is yet to be tackled significantly. But for heating, this is gas, and you can see this winter demand and peak. So what we'd really be looking to do is actually generate and store excess hydrogen that could actually be used in the winter time. So that's the challenge for us. So large-scale energy storage on the grid. If we look at battery farms or battery banks, tend to want to discharge batteries in hours or days. If we're actually looking for hydrogen storage, and that's power to gas to power, then we're looking somewhere where we can store it for weeks or months so that we can use it in times of highest demand. Can we scale up storage on grid? Well, there are ongoing demonstrators. The H100 projects ongoing at the minute are looking into that. But in terms of bulk storage, we're probably looking to store underground. We already have over 30 large salt caverns in the UK today. This is a study by the BGS which shows that there's opportunities in the Irish Sea, in the southern North Sea, and in discrete parts of onshore England in this case. But there aren't actually any identified within Scotland that we're aware of. There's actually a couple here in Northern Ireland. So yes, there are some discrete locations where it's seen that underground storage can work. Here's an example of some of those salt caverns we can see here. This one on the right from Germany. And when we talk about salt caverns, here's the UK, across through Netherlands, Germany, right across all the way into Poland. We have lots and lots of salt which could be used, and indeed is being used for various gas storage of methane and other gases, and could indeed be used in the future for hydrogen. But it's not just salt caverns. There are deep saline aquifers. We could use depleted oil and gas fields, although if we've actually gone to the trouble of generating pure hydrogen, do we want to then mix it in with methane and ethane and propane and heavier hydrocarbons so that when it comes out we have to reprocess it again? Lined or unlined rock caverns is another possibility, as is being contemplated for case compressed air storage. Challenges, well, hydrogen has different physical and chemical properties to carbon dioxide, methane and air, which we currently store underground. It is very reactive, so we don't yet know the extent that it might react with subsurface minerals and fluids. The growth of hydrogen consuming microbes in the subsurface is an ongoing topic of study to understand, and also the containment issues associated with repeated injection reproduction cycles, challenging the integrity of your salt cavern. And we also know that in cases we do have to understand induced seismicity. So there are challenges associated with underground storage. But a study that was done, the Hyundai study back in 2019, identified quite a number of sites that actually could be the orange or potentially on stream by 2025, and the red is the number that we could get to by 2030. So there could be a number of caverns, particularly in some of the countries in Northern Europe. Why salt caverns? Well, we've got a proven track record for storing methane and other gases. They offer flexibility when operated on a highly cyclical basis. There's a generally low proportion of cushion gas, and this sort of shows you'd have hydrogen at the top here, and then you'd have a cushion gas underneath that. And generally speaking, salt caverns are clean, unlike depleted hydrocarbon fields. So we said it before, methane has got a higher energy density, but this is just density here. With hydrogen, when we're looking to see if we can just use the existing infrastructure, reuse the pipelines and the terminals, you can see that we do have issues with hydrogen embrittlement. Not an issue for mild steel, but pipelines are made of hard steel. And so if we were to try and convert these for hydrogen service, there would be a massive capital cost, either lining these pipelines or simply having to replace them. Another issue, and this is a bit sort of technical, but in terms of line packs, so when you're going down to shut down the system, you charge up the pipeline network, you pack as much gas into it as you can, so that when you come to a start, there's a surge of gas available to actually kick everything off. The problem is that with methane, you only get about a third of the time with a line pack compared to methane. The reality, we already have methane storage. It is already a major strategic reserve in many countries in the world, where it's fed by multiple gas fields and oil fields offshore. And there is existing infrastructure. Domestic appliances are optimized to use methane. So in order to change that, it will involve a huge expenditure, both in terms of money, in terms of energy, to actually make that happen. And hydrogen will struggle to compete with methane due to the high cost of electrolyzers and expensive storage costs. And that can only really change if there is a sort of a punitive carbon tax that is basically set by governments and kind of globally as well. So we can't use existing gas infrastructure as the sort of takeaway from this. So we probably are looking at having to replace or rebuild. So that's a look at the underground storage and storage issues, which are still being addressed. It's a fast-moving area. What I'd like to just look at now briefly, these are all the projects and the sizes of projects that we have within Trove. And I basically just cut off the bottom of the graph there, and you can see that the first and the one and only project that was greater than 1 megawatt electric was this project here back in 2005. But you can see that really it's been within this last decade that projects of any size have really started to appear, and they are projected to go on for the next decade here to 2030. We can see here we've got 4 orders of magnitude in terms of the size. So we are starting to see the scale up of hydrogen, and its growth is going to be exponential, there is no doubt. So finally, some conclusions. Well, hydrogen does have a place in the future, there is no doubt. And in particular areas where we focus, there are some great solutions that involve hydrogen. There are other solutions which may favour different forms of energy. It's typically twice as efficient to move electricity than to actually move hydrogen as a bulk gas. So actually turning hydrogen at source into electricity and then moving the electricity seems to be a more sensible way to go forward in the majority of cases. Existing methane pipelines are highly unlikely to work for hydrogen. Without a meaningful carbon tax, methane will continue to be a cheaper solution in many cases. We need to tackle the big wins early. Cars have alternatives, batteries. It probably is that batteries in the short term are a sensible way forward. Certainly focusing on larger transport systems, buses and trucks and perhaps trains. That's where hydrogen fuel cells could certainly come into their own. Global government policy alignment is needed to agree things like sensible carbon tax, to stop treating the atmosphere as that open sewer I referred to earlier, and to initiate the infrastructure development. It's going to take a huge amount of capital, so that really needs to be funded from major public sources. COP26 may well determine the future, the rate and the extent of hydrogen production. And I've got to say, if you want to find useful data fast, use TROVE. And with that, I just want to very, very quickly go through a quick look at TROVE. Now, it's going to go very, very quickly. So we have global coverage. You can see the map where all the projects are. I mean, there's over 700 in there. It's Excel based. We have over 50 countries involved. It's an app where you simply push buttons and click. It's been developed. We have charts that we can look at and dashboards and slices that you can slice and dice the system in any which way you want. Looking at some of the 700 projects, some of them just here listed alphabetically, you can see that for each of them, lots and lots of information. And this is a click of a button away from finding information on each and every one of these projects, the 700 projects we have in TROVE. We look at about 50 countries here, and again, we've just chosen alphabetically. We're just showing some of the entries as was at the time of putting this together for the countries A to G. In terms of the data that we hold, well, it's all information is all held in a sort of a flat file, so it's a table with dates and capacities and owners, location information, the source of the hydrogen, the capacity, and much, much more besides. And it's simply click to navigate. And with that, I thank you very much for your time and your attention, and I hand back to Rose. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you, everyone who tuned in today. Also, a big thank you to those who have helped make this renewable energy webinar series a success. So if you wish to see anything specific from us in the future, get in touch. We do have time now for a few questions. Any questions we don't have time to answer today will be answered online and will be available from next week. So if we jump into the questions now, I've actually received a few questions through the private message from some people who couldn't make it live today. So it might be worthwhile me asking those in case they're of interest to others watching as well. So I'll kick it off with the first one, which is, does TROVE include only hydrogen plants, or does it include the uses too?
Yeah, so what the intended application is, we try and capture that as well as the technology that's being used. So, I mean, that sometimes it can be just simply generating hydrogen, which will then go on to be used in a variety of applications. But yes, we do capture it. So you could go through TROVE and you could find every case of cars. Where in the world are we seeing car projects, or trucks, or forklift trucks, or that sort of thing. So it can be sliced and diced in whatever way people want.
Thanks, Mike. I also have one more here. What sector do you see as the key target for hydrogen?
I think ammonia. I mean, I know we haven't spoken about it very much, but it is one of the major uses of it. And again, it's one of these discrete sources. So if you could actually produce hydrogen quite close to the ammonia plants, and ammonia, in itself can be used in fertilizer, but it can also is a very energy dense potential fuel. So another source of it. But I mean, right now, people across the planet are looking at every which application and developing technologies to use it right across the hydrogen economy or the economy, whichever you prefer.
We're coming up to 1 hour, so I'll have time for one more question. The last question is, have there been any developments in hydrogen, only turbines or burners, and is that economic or feasible?
Well, the answer is yes, it is economic and feasible. But I mean, you go back to this energy density issue. So in order to get the same bang for your buck with hydrogen, you have to do work to compress it. You have to run your turbines therefore at higher pressures and burners. So yes, it is feasible to do it, and redesigning burners to work on hydrogen is absolutely is doable. But right now there is the issue of it's going to take perhaps potentially longer to boil your kettle, or you're going to have a higher throughput of gas just to get the same heating time as you would with methane. Yeah, but it's definitely one of the great things about it. We're constantly updating the database, and we learn about new projects every day and every week, and so so it is growing and growing, and our subscribers benefit from the fact that as we improve it and make it bigger and better, they get the latest. They become aware of the latest developments in this fast growing industry.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike, for answering those questions. If you want to see a demo of any Trove, please don't hesitate just to get in touch with us through any contact through our contact form on the website or at info@troverenewables.com. Also, keep an eye out on our LinkedIn page for any future videos or webinars. And excuse me, thanks again for watching, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye now. Well, hope you enjoyed our video. There's more in the series, so go to our channel and you'll find there lots of information on oil and gas assets from around the world, as well as the renewables. So look forward to seeing you back on our channel soon.